The moment the heavy steel thermos slammed against the counter, a bizarre silence swallowed the room. Not a peaceful quiet, it was the dead. Ringing silence right after a car crash. I stood there, watching hot coffee seep through my shirt, the burning heat blooming across my shoulder seconds later. Marcus was 3 feet away, screaming at me to wire him $15,000 or get out. Beneath the table, my old rescue dog trembled. I didn't scream back. I just looked at the man I married, realizing with terrifying clarity that I was looking at a complete stranger. I did not say a single word. I reached over, picked up my car keys from the counter, and bent down to scoop Barnaby into my arms. He felt so fragile against my chest, his little heart beating frantically against my ribs. Marcus just stood there, his jaw tight, waiting for the argument. He was waiting for the tears, the bargaining, the usual routine where I would slowly bend to his will to keep the peace. But the peace was already gone. I walked out the front door and left him standing in the middle of our kitchen. I strapped Barnaby into the passenger seat of my car. I sat behind the wheel for 45 seconds, just watching the house in the rearview mirror. I looked at my hands resting on the steering wheel. They were completely steady. Not a single tremor. That is how shock works sometimes. It does not always look like hysteria. Sometimes it looks like a sudden, terrifying clarity. It is a cold, clinical focus that washes over you when the illusion finally breaks. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the life I thought I knew. I drove straight to my private clinic in Oak Park. The streets were quiet, the morning traffic just starting to build. My shoulder throbbed with a dull, spreading heat where the coffee had burned through my clothes. As a pediatric physical therapist, I knew exactly how to treat it. I needed cool water, sterile gauze, and time. When I unlocked the back door of my clinic and turned on the fluorescent lights, the familiar smell of antiseptic and lavender oil grounded me. I took off my ruined shirt and assessed the angry red mark spreading across my skin. It was painful, yes, but it was also undeniable proof. It was documentation of the moment Marcus crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. As I carefully wrapped the bandage around my shoulder, my mind began to work in a way it had not worked in years. The fog was lifting. I was no longer the accommodating wife trying to keep everything together. I was a woman taking inventory of her life. I realized that this explosion was not a sudden accident. It was the final result of a very long, very deliberate process. If you have ever looked at someone you trusted and realized you never truly knew them, tell me where and what time you are listening to this. It helps to know I am not alone. I had spent 4 years building a life with Marcus, trusting him blindly because of his career in wealth management. I thought he was the responsible one. I thought he was the logical one. But sitting there in my quiet clinic, with my dog asleep on a therapy mat, the pieces finally started clicking into place. The financial demands, the emotional manipulation, the sudden rage over $15,000. Everything was connected. I had lost 4 years to a carefully constructed lie. But the truth had actually started unraveling 3 weeks earlier, with a single, insignificant piece of paper. The truth was hiding. My clinic was my absolute sanctuary. I opened it 2 years ago in a quiet corner of Oak Park, a neighbourhood known for its historic Victorian homes and tree-lined streets. It was a modest space, but it was entirely mine. I specialised in paediatric physical therapy, working with children who needed help finding their footing in the world. The walls were painted a soft, calming green, and the floors were covered in thick, protective mats. This was the only place where I felt completely in control of my own destiny. Barnaby loved the clinic. He was a 12-year-old terrier mix I had rescued long before Marcus entered the picture. He would spend hours sleeping in the corner, offering a quiet, comforting presence to the kids who came in for treatment. He was my shadow. and his safety meant more to me than anything else. Seeing him cower under the table that morning had triggered a protective instinct in me that I did not know I possessed. But the real heart of my work was a little boy named Leo. Leo was 8 years old. He had a neurological condition that made walking incredibly difficult for him. His family was struggling financially, navigating a broken healthcare system that left them with massive bills and very few options. When his mother brought him to my clinic in tears 6 months ago, I made a decision. I told her I would treat Leo off the books, free of charge, after my regular hours. Working with Leo was the highlight of my week. He was determined, resilient, and fiercely brave. Every time he managed to take 3 unassisted steps across the parallel bars, his face would light up with a smile that could break your heart. He fought for every inch of progress. Watching him push through his physical pain made the emotional coldness of my marriage feel even more suffocating. Marcus hated the fact that I treated Leo for free. As a wealth manager, Marcus viewed everything through the lens of profit and loss. He could not understand why I would spend my evenings working with a child who could not pay my hourly rate. He called it a waste of earning potential. He wanted me to generate more income. He said we needed the extra cash to build our future, to secure our investments, to maintain the lifestyle he believed we deserved. He would stand in the doorway of my clinic, looking at the colourful therapy balls and wooden blocks with absolute disdain. He saw my compassion as a character flaw, a financial leak that needed to be plugged. But working with Leo kept my soul alive. It reminded me of who I was before I became a wife. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, when it was just me, Barnaby, and Leo working in the quiet clinic, I felt a profound sense of peace. That peace stood in sharp contrast to the constant, low-level anxiety that permeated my house. Marcus was not building a life with me. He was quietly draining the life right out of me, filtering my hard work into his own hidden agendas. And the very first real warning sign had slipped right through my fingers just a few weeks prior. I was entirely blind. 3 weeks before the coffee incident, I came home early from the clinic. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was sorting through the mail on the kitchen island when I noticed a strange envelope. It was a thick, high-priority letter from a subprime credit lender addressed directly to Marcus. Marcus was a wealth manager. He handled multi-million-dollar portfolios for wealthy clients. He prided himself on his immaculate credit score and his flawless financial planning. He despised debt. So, seeing a letter from a predatory lending company with his name on it made absolutely no sense. It was like finding a fast food wrapper in a 5-star restaurant kitchen. Before I could even open it to see what it was, Marcus walked through the front door. He dropped his briefcase, saw the envelope in my hand, and his entire demeanour shifted. His eyes darted to the logo, and he snatched it out of my fingers with a forced, breathless laugh. He claimed it was just junk mail, a spam offer that had somehow bypassed the filters. He immediately shredded it and threw it away. I let it go. I wanted to believe him. When you are married to a financial expert, you tend to defer to their judgment when it comes to money. That is the trap. You assume they have everything under control, so you stop asking the hard questions. But I was not entirely naive about finances. I had a safety net that Marcus could never touch, long before I met him. My grandfather passed away. My grandfather was a meticulous, old-school accountant who trusted no one with his money. Before he died, he set up an irrevocable trust in my name. The terms of the trust were ironclad. My grandfather had always warned me that financial independence was the only real protection a woman could have. Once the money went in, it belonged exclusively to the trust. Managed by a neutral, unshakable third-party trustee, it was legally fortified, completely shielded from marital assets, aggressive creditors, and manipulative spouses. Marcus knew the trust existed in theory, but he did not know the exact legal mechanics of it. Nor did he know how much I had managed to filter into it over the years from my private practice. I had been quietly saving my extra income, funneling it directly into that trust to eventually expand my clinic and hire another therapist. I had exactly $30,000 sitting in that fiercely protected account. It was my future. And Marcus had recently started making increasingly aggressive comments about how we should consolidate all our resources for better investment yields. He wanted control. Looking back, his sudden panic over that shredded envelope was the glaring red flag I deliberately chose to ignore. He was hiding something massive, something deeply compromising. That letter was the very first crack in his supposedly perfect financial facade. If I had pieced it together then, I could have saved myself from the physical burn on my shoulder. I ignored the signs. The truth is, the financial manipulation did not start with a demand for $15,000. It started much earlier, creeping into our lives so quietly that I barely noticed the water rising around my ankles. It started with Eleanor. Eleanor was Marcus's mother. She was a woman who demanded a lifestyle that her actual bank account could not support. She lived in a large, high-maintenance house in a wealthy suburb, insisting that she needed to keep up appearances. During our first year of marriage, Marcus and I set up a joint savings account for our household expenses and emergencies. We both contributed a fair percentage of our regular salaries. Everything felt balanced. Then, about 14 months into the marriage, the phone calls started. Eleanor would call Marcus during dinner, her voice trembling, complaining about a broken water heater or a sudden spike in property taxes. Marcus would hang up, sigh heavily, and look at me with defeated eyes. He suggested we send her $500 a month, just temporarily, to help her get back on her feet. $500 was a noticeable amount, but it was not enough to ruin us. I loved my husband, and I wanted to be a supportive partner. I agreed to the transfer. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was helping family. But temporary arrangements with Eleanor were never temporary. 6 months later, the $500 quietly doubled to $1,000. This time, it was a problem with her roof. Then it was a major repair on her luxury vehicle. There was always a crisis, always a desperate need for cash, and Marcus never once asked her for a receipt or a contractor's estimate. He just transferred the money directly from our joint account to hers. When I finally brought it up, asking if we could review our budget, Marcus became highly defensive. He used his profession as a shield. He reminded me that he was the wealth manager, that he understood cash flow better than a physical therapist ever could. He told me not to worry about it, assuring me that his quarterly bonuses would easily cover the deficit. But the deficit was growing. Our joint savings account completely stopped increasing. Every time we managed to put a little extra away, an emergency from Eleanor would magically appear and wipe it out. I was working exhausting shifts at the hospital and spending my evenings at the clinic, only to watch my hard-earned money funnel directly into Eleanor's lifestyle maintenance. I stopped looking at the joint statements because the bitter resentment was starting to actively poison my days. Every time I saw a transfer to Eleanor, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I chose to focus entirely on my private clinic, my patients, and my protected trust fund instead. I convinced myself that as long as my personal savings were secure, I could somehow tolerate the continuous drain on our shared resources. I rationalized it as the cost of a peaceful marriage. I was literally buying my own silence, month by month, transferring my own peace of mind to a woman who did not respect me. I let it happen. People often ask how a smart, financially independent woman allows herself to be slowly drained dry. They wonder why I did not just pack my bags and walk out the very first time Marcus transferred $1,000 to Eleanor without my explicit permission. The answer is terrifyingly simple normalization. When you are standing in the middle of it, you do not see the entire trap. You only see the individual steps. You compromise on a boundary to avoid a massive argument. You tell yourself that $500 is just money, and your marriage is worth more than money. You convince yourself that you are being generous, that you are the bigger person. This is the insidious nature of financial boundary crossing. It rarely begins with a massive theft. It begins with small, almost reasonable requests that test your compliance. Marcus knew exactly how to play on my empathy. He knew I spent my days helping vulnerable children like Leo. He weaponized my compassion against me. He framed every demand from Eleanor not as a financial burden, but as a strict moral obligation. I normalized the sacrifice. I convinced myself that every marriage has its unique challenges, and this was simply ours. When Marcus came home stressed and exhausted from managing other people's wealth, I wanted our house to be a sanctuary. I did not want to be the nagging wife demanding an audit of his mother's plumbing bills. I traded my financial boundaries for a quiet evening on the couch. But there is a heavy, invisible cost to that kind of profound silence. Every single time you swallow your legitimate discomfort, every time you let someone cross a clear line without a consequence, you chip away at your own fundamental dignity. You teach them exactly how to treat you by actively avoiding the small, uncomfortable conflicts over weekly bank transfers. I was actually funding my own eventual powerlessness. I genuinely thought I was keeping the peace in our household, but I was actually financing a silent, ongoing war against myself. Marcus and Eleanor quickly learned that my personal boundaries were highly negotiable. They learned that if they applied just enough emotional pressure, if they played the victim just long enough, I would eventually fold and sign off on the expense. I had inadvertently taught them that my hard-earned money was their permanent safety net. It is an incredibly bitter realization when you finally understand that your immense generosity was never truly appreciated. It was simply expected as a baseline. I was never an equal partner in their eyes. I was an active asset to be managed, a reliable resource to be allocated whenever Eleanor's extravagant lifestyle demanded a sudden injection of cash. I was actively financing a grand, toxic delusion, pouring my energy into a bottomless pit of their endless entitlement. The truth hurt deeply. Eleanor lived entirely for appearances. Her large Victorian house in the historic district of Oak Park was a meticulously curated museum of debt. She hosted elaborate luncheons for women she secretly despised. She bought luxury vehicles on terrible leasing terms. She cared more about the neighbourhood association's opinion than her own financial stability. She was a woman who demanded a lifestyle her actual pension could never support, and she viewed her son as her personal line of credit. When Eleanor visited our house, she brought a suffocating energy with her. You could smell her expensive floral perfume before she even walked through the door. She never openly criticised me. That was not her style. She preferred the weapon of backhanded compliments. She would run a manicured finger over my kitchen counter and sigh. She would ask if my work at the clinic was finally becoming profitable. She referred to my paediatric therapy practice as a cute little hobby. She absolutely despised my pro bono work. She knew I treated children from low-income families. She knew about patients like Leo. Eleanor would sit in my living room, sipping tea paid for by my income, and shake her head. She called it charity nonsense. She told Marcus that a woman with my medical degree should be catering exclusively to wealthy families recovering from skiing injuries. She believed empathy was a character flaw that cost money. Marcus never defended my career. He never corrected her assumptions. He would just stand silently beside her, nodding slightly to avoid a confrontation. He allowed her shadow to fall over every aspect of our lives. He let her diminish the work that brought me genuine joy. It was a subtle, daily erosion of respect. I watched him shrink in her presence, time and time again. I realized very early on that there was no room for me in their dynamic. I was an intruder in their financial codependency. I stopped trying to win her approval. I stopped trying to explain the medical milestones my young patients were achieving. I realized that Eleanor did not want a daughter-in-law. She wanted a silent financial contributor. She wanted someone to quietly absorb the massive cost of her lifestyle without asking any logical questions. She wanted an endless resource. I refused to play that specific role. Her shadow covered everything. I did not argue with Eleanor. I did not scream at Marcus when he transferred another $1,000 to cover her landscaping bills. I simply funneled all my frustration into intense, focused labour. I worked harder. I took on extra weekend shifts at the main hospital. I booked private consultation sessions late into the evening. I turned my quiet resentment into a highly productive machine. Every single extra dollar I earned went straight into my irrevocable trust. My grandfather had taught me well. He was a man of few words and strict ledgers. He always said that a woman's ultimate freedom was a bank account that no one else could access. He had established the trust precisely for a situation like this. The legal structure was beautifully rigid. Once I deposited the funds, they crossed an invisible, impenetrable legal line. The money belonged to the trust. It was managed by a neutral third party. It was utterly immune to marital property laws. Marcus could not touch it. I was quietly building my escape hatch. I just did not consciously realize it at the time. My stated goal was $30,000. That specific amount was exactly what I needed to sign a commercial lease for a larger clinic space. It was enough to purchase specialized pediatric equipment. It was enough to hire a part-time assistant so I could take on more pro bono cases like Leo. I worked until 9 o'clock every single night. I would come home exhausted, my muscles aching from supporting the weight of struggling children. I would find Marcus sitting on the couch, watching television, complaining about his wealthy clients. He never asked about my day. He never noticed the dark circles under my eyes. He only noticed the balance in our joint account. He knew I was saving money. He knew I had a separate fund for the clinic. He just did not understand the absolute legal fortress surrounding it. He assumed it was just another savings account. He assumed it was marital property. He assumed it was readily available cash. He looked at my exhaustion and only saw potential liquidity. He looked at my hard work and saw a solution to his mother's endless financial crises. He wanted my lifeline. To truly understand Marcus, you have to understand the invisible tether. You have to understand the profound psychological damage of the narcissistic family structure. Eleanor did not raise a son. She raised a permanent emotional retirement plan. Marcus was the classic golden child. He was trained from birth to manage her anxieties, to fix her mistakes, and to fund her delusions. It was a fascinating, deeply tragic psychological disconnect. In his professional life, Marcus was a shark. He was a highly paid wealth advisor. He managed massive portfolios for brilliant, demanding investors. He could ruthlessly analyze a corporate balance sheet. He could predict market downturns. He was decisive, aggressive, and highly competent. But the moment Eleanor called, that competence completely evaporated. He regressed instantly. He became a frightened child, terrified of his mother's disappointment. He could not apply a single principle of basic financial planning to her reckless spending. If she needed money for a luxury repair, he found the money. He bypassed all logic. He bypassed his own professional ethics. He bypassed our marriage vows. This is the narcissistic tether. It is a chain forged in childhood guilt and lifelong manipulation. Eleanor had convinced him that he owed her his entire existence. She made him believe that setting a basic financial boundary was an act of profound cruelty, and Marcus lacked the spine to cut the chain. Instead of dealing with his mother, he used my income as a buffer. He funded his toxic filial piety with my sweat. He was a financial coward. It was easier for him to quietly siphon money from our joint account than to tell Eleanor she needed to sell her massive house. It was easier to cross my boundaries than to establish his own. He was completely trapped. The breaking point did not arrive with a loud explosion. It arrived very quietly on a mundane Thursday evening. I came home late after a major breakthrough session with Leo. For the very first time, Leo had taken 4 complete unassisted steps across the parallel bars. I was glowing with a quiet, profound pride. I felt like my work actually mattered. I walked into the kitchen. Marcus was sitting at the island staring at his laptop, rhythmically tapping his expensive pen against the granite counter. He did not look up when I entered. He did not ask why I was smiling. He simply stated a new rule. He told me I needed to drop my pro bono cases immediately. He specifically named Leo. He said my charity work was a luxury we could no longer afford. He had run the numbers. He wanted me to use those evening hours to take on high-paying adult clients, people recovering from golf injuries, people who could pay premium hourly rates in cash. I stood perfectly still. The joy from Leo's achievement turned to ice in my chest. I asked him why we suddenly needed more cash. We were living comfortably. I covered my share of all the bills. Marcus looked at me with cold, calculating eyes. He said we needed to increase our liquidity. He measured my empathy against a spreadsheet. He treated a disabled child's progress as a negative return on investment. He wanted me to look into the eyes of a struggling mother and tell her I could no longer help her son, simply because Marcus needed more surplus cash to funnel toward Eleanor's phantom emergencies. It felt like a physical strike to my core. The respect was gone. The final confrontation began over a glossy piece of paper. It was a Tuesday evening, the night before the thermos incident. I was standing in the kitchen, exhausted from a 10-hour shift. Marcus walked in, looking strangely energized. He placed a heavy, expensive brochure on the kitchen counter and slid it toward me. It was an itinerary for a luxury Mediterranean cruise. 14 days, VIP suites, exclusive excursions. I looked at the cover, then looked up at him. I asked him who was going on a cruise. Marcus smiled a tight, rehearsed smile. He announced that he had promised Eleanor this specific trip for her upcoming milestone birthday. He said she had always dreamed of seeing the Amalfi Coast. He tapped the price tag printed on the back page. The total cost was $15,000. He stated the number as a simple fact. It was not a request. It was an executive summary. He calmly informed me that we needed to pull the money from my clinic expansion fund. He knew I had exactly $30,000 saved. He thought he had a right to half of it. He believed my years of work in overtime, my extra shifts, and my careful planning was simply a convenient slush fund for his mother's vacation. I did not raise my voice. I placed my hand flat on the cool granite counter. I looked directly into his eyes. I told him absolutely not. I told him we had not discussed this. I told him my clinic fund was not his personal account. I told him Eleanor could pay for her own vacations. I refused his demand. That brings us back to the morning the thermos shattered. The tension from the previous night had metastasized into a suffocating hostility. Marcus woke up furious. His rehearsed calmness was completely gone. The realization that I was actually saying no to him had short-circuited his brain. He paced the kitchen like a caged animal while I quietly poured my morning coffee into my steel thermos. He demanded I log into the bank portal and wire the $15,000 by noon. He said the travel agency needed the deposit today. He accused me of being terribly selfish. He accused me of ruining his relationship with Eleanor. He threw every manipulative tactic he had learned from his mother directly at me. I stood my ground. I screwed the lid onto my thermos. I calmly explained, using very slow, precise words, that my clinic fund was legally protected. I told him he was crossing a line. My steady voice enraged him. It highlighted his profound lack of control. It forced him to face the reality that he could not bully me. He lunged forward. His hand shot out in a blind, reckless arc. He struck the thermos hard. The heavy steel flew across the island, smashing into the granite edge. The lid popped off on impact. The scalding coffee splashed violently into the air, raining down across my left shoulder and collarbone. The physical pain registered seconds later. The marriage was dead. I did not go back to the house. I did not call my mother to cry. I did not seek comfort. Comfort is a temporary solution, and I needed permanent leverage. After applying a proper sterile dressing to my shoulder at the clinic, I locked the doors and put Barnaby back into the car. I drove perfectly at the speed limit. I bypassed the residential streets of Oak Park and headed directly toward the local police precinct. Walking into a police station is usually an intimidating experience, but I did not walk through those double glass doors looking like a broken, hysterical victim. I walked in with the steady posture of a medical professional presenting a clinical case. I approached the front desk and asked to file a formal report for a domestic disturbance resulting in physical injury. The intake officer was a woman named Officer Hayes. She was observant and highly professional. She led me into a quiet, fluorescent-lit room away from the main lobby. I sat across from her and laid out the facts. I stripped the emotion entirely out of my voice. I gave her the exact time of the incident. I provided a detailed layout of the kitchen island. I described the precise trajectory of the heavy steel thermos when Marcus struck it. I carefully unbuttoned the top of my shirt so the female officer could photograph the angry, blistered skin across my collarbone. The camera flashed, immortalizing the moment. It was no longer just a bad memory. It was an evidentiary exhibit. It was a documented medical injury with a corresponding police file number. Officer Hayes asked if I needed an emergency protective order or if I felt my life was in immediate danger. I told her I did not. Marcus was not a physical predator by nature. He was a financial coward who had lost his temper because he had lost control. He would never risk a physical altercation that could lead to his immediate arrest and ruin his pristine corporate reputation. He only fought behind closed doors. But those doors were now permanently open. I signed my statement, I memorised the case number. I thanked the officer for her time and walked back out into the cool morning air. I had just created a permanent, unerasable black mark on Marcus's flawless background. The legal machinery was now in motion. There was no going back. I had the upper hand. I sat in the driver's seat of my car in the police station parking lot. My phone had been vibrating silently in my bag for the past 2 hours. I finally pulled it out. The screen was illuminated with 7 missed calls and 3 text messages. All of them were from Marcus. I did not expect an apology, but the sheer audacity of his messages still managed to impress me. I opened the text thread. The first message arrived exactly 40 minutes after I had left the house. It read, "Where did you go? We are not done talking about this." The second message came an hour later. "When you calm down and stop acting dramatic, come back to the house. Mum is waiting for the deposit confirmation." The final message was sent just 10 minutes before I checked my phone. "I am going to the office. Do not make this a bigger deal than it is. It was an accident. Transfer the funds by noon so we can put this behind us." I read the words 3 times over. I analysed his sentence structure the same way I analysed a patient's medical chart. There was zero accountability. There was no inquiry about my physical well-being. There was only annoyance that I had disrupted his schedule, and a persistent, arrogant demand for the $15,000. He genuinely believed that if he just ignored his violent outburst, I would eventually fall back into line and submit to his financial authority. He was relying on the old version of me, the Evelyn who hated conflict, the Evelyn who would rather write a check than endure a weekend of silent treatment. But that version of me had burned away the moment the hot coffee hit my skin. His messages were not just insulting, they were highly instructive. They confirmed that his reality was completely distorted. He believed he was completely untouchable. He thought his career in wealth management made him the absolute authority on all matters, including my own boundaries. He had no idea what I had just done inside that police station. He had no idea that a file with his name on it was currently sitting on a sergeant's desk. I took a screenshot of every single message and saved them to a secure cloud drive. I locked my phone. I was entirely done. I drove to my colleague Sarah's house. She was at work, but she had given me her spare key months ago for emergencies. It was a quiet, empty space. I fed Barnaby, settled him on a soft rug in the living room, and opened my laptop on the dining table. I needed to understand the exact motivation behind the morning's violence. Marcus was arrogant, but he was also highly calculated. Throwing a tantrum over a luxury cruise for Eleanor did not fit his usual pattern of quiet manipulation. $15,000 was a specific, heavy number. It was too urgent. He had demanded the wire transfer by noon. Travel agencies booking birthday cruises do not usually require immediate same-day cash deposits from frantic sons. Something else was driving his desperation. I logged into our shared home server because Marcus managed the money. He kept all our tax returns, joint credit summaries, and household ledgers neatly organised in a synchronised drive. He never bothered to hide the main folders because he assumed I would never bother to look. He severely underestimated my analytical skills. I ignored the standard checking accounts. I bypassed the retirement portfolios. I dug straight into the archived credit reports and the hidden subfolders labelled miscellaneous liabilities. I spent 3 hours methodically cross-referencing dates, amounts, and institutional names. I remembered the strange piece of junk mail from the subprime lender 3 weeks ago. I searched the server for that specific company's name. A hidden PDF document finally populated on my screen. I clicked on it. It was a scanned copy of a signed digital contract. I zoomed in on the electronic signatures. I looked at the principal amount. I looked at the compounding interest rate. Suddenly, the entire illusion collapsed into a single, undeniable truth. The pieces finally fit. If you have ever found a piece of paper that changed everything you thought you knew, tell me where you are listening to this right now. It helps to share the burden. The document on my screen was not a travel itinerary for the Amalfi Coast. It was a legally binding debt consolidation agreement. The truth was stark and embarrassing. Eleanor had not just been overspending on landscaping and roof repairs, she had been secretly funding a massive, unsustainable lifestyle using high-interest, predatory credit cards. When the minimum payments became too large for her modest pension, she faced immediate default. She was on the verge of bankruptcy. Instead of forcing her to sell her Victorian house and downsize like a rational adult, Marcus had stepped in to save her pride. 3 weeks ago, he had secretly co-signed a massive subprime loan to consolidate her credit card debt. He had legally attached his own pristine name to his mother's financial disaster. But Eleanor had immediately defaulted on the new agreement. The predatory interest had kicked in, triggering a severe penalty clause. The document clearly stated that a lump sum payment was required immediately to prevent the debt from being reported to the major credit bureaus. The exact amount required to halt the default $15,000. There was no luxury Mediterranean cruise. There was no milestone birthday celebration. The glossy brochure he had shown me the night before was a fabricated prop. It was a desperate, humiliating cover story. Marcus needed my $30,000 clinic fund not to buy his mother a vacation, but to save his own professional skin. If a severe default hit Marcus's personal credit report, his firm's compliance department would flag it instantly. A wealth manager with predatory debt in default is a massive liability. He would lose his licenses, he would lose his high-paying clients, he would lose his job. He was drowning in his mother's financial incompetence. And instead of holding her accountable, he had decided to break into my protected future to bail them both out. He thought I was stupid enough to fund a fake vacation. He was desperate. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I walked into the downtown office of Grace Sterling. Grace was a senior family law attorney. She did not deal in emotional drama. She dealt in paper trails, corporate structures, and absolute leverage. She was exactly the kind of architect I needed to dismantle Marcus's life. I sat across her wide mahogany desk. I handed her a physical folder. Inside was the police report from that morning, the photographs of the burn on my shoulder, and the printed evidence of Marcus's secret subprime debt. I laid the documents out like playing cards. Grace reviewed the police report without changing her expression. She then analysed the loan documents. He co-signed a predatory loan without your knowledge, she noted, her voice steady. And now he is attempting to coerce marital funds to cover his personal liability. He wants half of the $30,000 I saved for my clinic. I replied, he intends to use it by the end of the day. Grace finally looked up and smiled a very thin, very dangerous smile. Where, exactly, is this clinic fund currently housed? I pulled the final document from my bag. It was the master agreement for the irrevocable trust established by my late grandfather. This is the ultimate beauty of paper trail justice. An irrevocable trust is not a simple bank account. It is a separate legal entity. Once I moved my extra earnings into that trust, the money legally ceased to be mine in the traditional sense. It belonged to the trust. The funds are completely isolated, Grace confirmed, tapping the thick parchment. Marcus has absolutely no jurisdiction here. Even in a divorce, he cannot touch a single cent of this principal. His demand for the $15,000 is legally irrelevant. He is trying to rob a vault he does not even have the right to look at. The relief that washed over me was intoxicating. I did not need to scream at Marcus. I did not need to argue with Eleanor. The law had already spoken. My grandfather had protected me from beyond the grave. The trap was set. Grace did not waste a single minute. While I sat in her office drinking a glass of cold water, her legal team sprang into a highly coordinated choreography of absolute destruction. The preparation was silent, swift, and lethal. First, Grace drafted the official divorce petition. She cited financial infidelity and domestic abuse as the primary causes, attaching the police report directly to the filing. This was not going to be a quiet, amicable separation. It was going to be a matter of public judicial record. Second, she filed an emergency financial injunction because Marcus had demonstrated a clear willingness to secretly leverage marital assets to cover his mother's hidden debts. Grace secured a court order freezing all of our joint checking and savings accounts immediately. Marcus would not be able to transfer a single dollar to Eleanor. His access to our shared liquidity was completely severed. Finally, she drafted a formal cease and desist letter directed at Marcus. It explicitly outlined the boundaries of the irrevocable trust, serving as a legal warning that any further attempt to access or demand my clinic funds would be met with severe judicial sanctions. I signed every single document with a steady hand. I felt lighter than I had in 4 years. I was no longer playing defense against Eleanor's endless demands. I was no longer shrinking away from Marcus's arrogant lectures about cash flow. I was armed with the most powerful ammunition in the world documented, irrefutable facts. Grace handed me a sealed envelope containing the filed documents. He will likely try to corner you to negotiate when he realises the joint accounts are frozen, she warned. Do not engage in a debate. Let the paperwork do the talking. I thanked her and walked out of the high-rise building. The afternoon sun felt warm against my face. I had my dog. I had my clinic. I had my trust fund safely locked behind a legal fortress. I was perfectly ready for the war. If you believe the best revenge is a solid, undeniable paper trail, drop a heart in the comments below. I spent the night at my colleague Sarah's quiet house, sleeping more soundly than I had in over 4 years. The morning light filtering through the guest room window felt remarkably clean. I woke up, brewed a cup of black coffee, and sat at the dining table with Barnaby resting peacefully at my feet. The manila folders containing my newly filed legal documents sat perfectly aligned next to my coffee mug. I was simply waiting for the inevitable. I knew Marcus could not tolerate losing control, and I knew he would use the tracking feature on our shared cell phone plan to find my location. At exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, the heavy brass knocker on Sarah's front door sounded. The knocking was not frantic, it was sharp and authoritative. I walked to the door, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled it open. Marcus stood on the front porch, wearing a tailored navy suit, looking perfectly put together. Standing directly behind him, clutching an expensive leather handbag, was Eleanor. They walked into the foyer without waiting for an invitation. Eleanor immediately began inspecting the modest living room, her eyes darting over Sarah's simple furniture with obvious distaste. She sighed heavily, playing the role of the exhausted, deeply disappointed matriarch. Marcus stepped forward, offering a completely fabricated, patronising smile. He held his hands up in a gesture of fake surrender. He told me that I had made my point by running away, but it was time to stop acting like a dramatic teenager. He said that leaving the house over a simple disagreement was embarrassing for everyone involved. Eleanor chimed in from the background, stating that marriage required compromise and that I was being incredibly selfish regarding her milestone birthday. They had clearly rehearsed this exact routine on the drive over. They expected me to lower my eyes, apologise for my behaviour, and immediately log into the banking portal to transfer the $15,000. I did not offer them a seat. I did not offer them coffee. I walked back to the dining table, pulled out a chair, and sat down. I looked at the two of them standing in the middle of a house they did not own, demanding money they did not earn. The absolute arrogance radiating from Marcus was staggering. He genuinely believed that wearing a nice suit and using a condescending tone would instantly erase the physical burn healing on my shoulder. He thought he was the smartest person in the room. They were entirely wrong. Marcus checked his heavy silver wristwatch. He informed me that he had a client meeting at noon and needed this trivial misunderstanding resolved immediately. He pulled his phone from his pocket and explicitly instructed me to initiate the wire transfer for his mother's luxury cruise. He spoke to me as if I were a recalcitrant subordinate failing to execute a basic administrative task. I remained seated. I did not reach for my phone. Instead, I rested my hands flat on top of the manila folders. I looked directly past Marcus and fixed my gaze firmly on his mother. "There is no cruise to the Amalfi Coast," I said. My voice was completely flat, devoid of any emotional inflection. There are no VIP suites, and there are no luxury excursions. Eleanor's patronising smile faltered slightly. Marcus froze, his thumb hovering over his phone screen. I opened the first folder and slid a thick stack of printed papers across the smooth wooden table. The documents fanned out perfectly. The bold logo of the predatory subprime lender was clearly visible at the top of the very first page. "You did not come here for vacation funds. Marcus," I continued, keeping my eyes locked on him. "You came here because exactly 3 weeks ago, you co-signed a predatory debt consolidation loan for Eleanor. You attached your pristine professional name to her massive, unsustainable credit card debt. And because she has already defaulted, the penalty clause has been triggered. the exact amount required to halt the immediate reporting to the major credit bureaus is $15,000. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. The colour instantly drained from Eleanor's face, leaving her pale and trembling. She had spent her entire life pretending to be a woman of substantial wealth, and her deepest, most humiliating secret was now sitting openly on a dining room table. Marcus stared at the loan documents as if they were venomous snakes. He could not comprehend how I had bypassed his security measures. He had always assumed I was too consumed by my paediatric patients to understand complex financial ledgers. He had underestimated my intelligence for the very last time. I watched his corporate mask completely disintegrate, replaced by genuine, naked terror. The power dynamic shifted instantly. I was in control. The transformation was astonishing to witness. Marcus, the highly paid, arrogant wealth manager, began to stammer. His tailored suit suddenly looked far too large for him. He took a hesitant step toward the table, his hands shaking as he reached for the loan documents. He desperately tried to regain his footing, shifting immediately from authority to victimhood. He begged me to understand his position. He explained that the compliance department at his financial firm continuously monitored the credit reports of all their senior advisors. A massive default on a subprime, high-interest loan was considered a severe ethical and financial violation. He told me that if the penalty was not paid by the end of the business day, the default would hit his official record, he would be stripped of his licensing, he would lose his wealthy clients. His entire career in wealth management would be completely annihilated. I had to do it, Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking. She is my mother. She was going to lose her house. I just needed to buy her some time. I need your $30,000 to clear this penalty. I will pay you back. I promise you. I will rebuild your clinic fund. Eleanor finally found her voice. She began to cry, but they were not tears of genuine remorse. They were tears of pure self-pity. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing about how the neighbourhood association would judge her if she went bankrupt. She begged me not to ruin her son's brilliant career over a simple mistake. She played the frail, misunderstood mother perfectly. 2 days ago, this theatrical display of familial panic might have manipulated my empathy. I might have sacrificed my own hard work to rescue them from their reckless choices. But sitting there, feeling the dull ache of the burn on my shoulder, I felt absolutely nothing. Their desperate defence was hollow. They were not apologising for hurting me. They were simply terrified of facing their own consequences. I watched them beg. Se chong hai moi mot tre, hai moi be much tio nam trum, nam moi jam viet ba trum, bon moi lum, trus han and has and omet seer zam ti. Chung hai moi hai, the decisive blow. I let them exhaust themselves. I let Marcus stumble through his frantic promises of repayment. I let Eleanor sob into her expensive silk tissue. When the room finally fell quiet again, I opened the second manila folder. I am not giving you a single dollar, I stated quietly. Marcus slammed his hand on the table, a brief flash of his former rage returning. You are my wife. You cannot just watch my career burn to the ground when you have the cash sitting right there. I slid the next document across the table. It was the official police report, complete with the precinct's red stamp and the female officer's signature. Right next to it, I placed the high-resolution, colour photograph of the blistering burn extending across my collarbone. Marcus looked down at the photograph, and all the air left his lungs. You threw a heavy steel thermos at me yesterday morning, I said. My voice as precise as a surgeon's scalpel. You caused a documented physical injury. This is no longer a private marital dispute over cash flow. This is a matter of criminal record. Grace Sterling, my attorney, has already filed the divorce petition citing financial infidelity and domestic abuse. I leaned forward slightly. Your compliance department cares about predatory loans. Marcus, but how do you think your firm's partners will react when they receive a certified copy of a police report detailing your violent outburst against your wife? You are not just facing a credit default. You are facing complete professional ruin. You destroyed your own career the moment you lost your temper. Eleanor gasped, stepping away from her son as if he were suddenly contagious. Marcus stood paralyzed, his eyes locked on the photograph of my burned skin. He finally realized the sheer magnitude of his miscalculation. He had brought his arrogance to a fight where I was holding all the legal ammunition. There was absolutely no escape. Panic is a highly unpredictable emotion. Instead of accepting defeat, Marcus went into absolute survival mode. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling violently, and dialed his aggressive corporate attorney. He put the call on speakerphone, slamming the device onto the dining table. The lawyer's voice echoed sharply in the quiet room. After Marcus frantically explained that I was refusing to hand over the $30,000 and was holding a police report, the lawyer went on the offensive. He used a booming, intimidating tone designed to frighten a layperson. He declared that my clinic fund was community property under marital law. He threatened to file an immediate emergency injunction to freeze every single asset I had. He promised to drag the divorce out for years, ensuring I would be completely bled dry by legal fees before I ever saw a courtroom. Marcus looked at me with a desperate, triumphant glare. He thought he had found his leverage. He thought the threat of a brutal legal war would finally break my composure. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee. I waited for the lawyer to finish his aggressive rant. Then I leaned toward the phone. "This is Evelyn," I said clearly. "Before you draft those injunctions, you should advise your client to review the exact legal structure of my clinic fund. The $30,000 is entirely housed within an irrevocable trust, established by my late grandfather 3 years prior to this marriage. The funds are managed by an independent third-party trustee. It is legally isolated and entirely exempt from marital asset division." The silence on the other end of the line was thick and immediate. "Furthermore," I added, "the police report regarding your client's physical violence is already logged. Our joint accounts have already been frozen by my attorney. Grace Sterling, as of 8 o'clock this morning." I heard a heavy sigh from the speaker. The lawyer's aggressive tone completely vanished. "Marcus," the attorney said quietly, "is this true? Did you assault her, and did you fail to mention a pre-existing irrevocable trust?" Marcus could only produce a pathetic, suffocated sound. "I cannot help you breach a protected trust," the lawyer stated coldly. "And I do not represent clients in domestic violence cases. You need to find other representation." The line clicked dead. The false leverage evaporated into thin air. It was finished. The collapse of Marcus's life did not happen in a single, dramatic explosion. It happened the way a poorly constructed building finally gives way to gravity, slowly at first, and then all at once. The divorce proceedings took exactly 4 months. Grace was a master of procedural efficiency. Because of the documented police report detailing his physical violence, and the undeniable financial records proving he attempted to secretly leverage marital funds for a predatory debt, Marcus possessed absolutely zero negotiating power. He did not even attempt to take the matter to trial. He knew a public courtroom would permanently destroy whatever fragments of dignity he had left. We settled through mediation. I kept my clinic, my car, and every single dollar inside my grandfather's irrevocable trust. Marcus kept his massive subprime debt. The professional fallout was far more severe than the divorce. The compliance department at his wealth management firm conducted a routine semi-annual audit of their senior advisors. when the severe default on the predatory loan flagged in their system, they initiated a deeper background check. The existence of an active domestic disturbance file at the local police precinct was the final nail in his corporate coffin. In the highly regulated world of wealth management, a volatile advisor with toxic debt is a massive liability. They terminated his employment contract on a Tuesday afternoon. Without his high six-figure salary, the financial reality of Eleanor's lifestyle came crashing down. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings on her Victorian house in Oak Park. Marcus was forced to liquidate his remaining personal assets at a severe loss just to keep his mother out of a courtroom. Eleanor had to pack up her curated life and move into a small, rented apartment in a neighbourhood she previously would not have dared to drive through. Her social standing evaporated overnight. The women she used to host for lavish luncheons completely stopped returning her phone calls. I heard all of this through a mutual acquaintance. I did not smile. I did not celebrate. I simply recognised the cold, mathematical certainty of their ruin. They had built a house of cards on a foundation of lies. The wind had finally blown. 8 months after the divorce was finalised, I opened the doors to my new paediatric physical therapy centre. I had used a carefully calculated portion of my trust fund to sign a commercial lease on a bright, spacious building with massive windows. I named it the Horizon Therapy Centre. The architecture of peace is something you have to experience physically to truly understand. For 4 years, my nervous system had been trapped in a state of constant, low-level vigilance. I was always waiting for the next financial crisis, the next heavy sigh from Marcus, the next passive-aggressive comment from Eleanor. Now, the silence in my life was completely mine. Walking into my clinic every morning was a profound sensory experience. The air always smelled faintly of tea tree oil and fresh linen. The morning sunlight poured across the pristine wooden floors and the brightly coloured therapy mats. There was no tension hiding in the corners. There was no one waiting to demand the money I had earned with my own hands. Barnaby, my old terrier mix, had a thick orthopaedic bed positioned perfectly in the warmest patch of sunlight near the reception desk. He no longer shivered or hid under furniture. He slept soundly, his breathing slow and even. Animals absorb the energy of their environment, and my dog knew that we were finally safe. The true reward, however, arrived every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. Leo was still my patient, because my private practice was now expanding and generating a healthy profit from paying clients. I completely subsidised Leo's long-term treatment plan. Watching him work on the parallel bars was a completely different experience now. I was not exhausted. I was not secretly worried about my bank account. I was fully present. Last week, Leo let go of the wooden rails. He stood perfectly balanced on his own 2 feet for 10 entirely unassisted seconds. His mother covered her mouth to stifle a sob. I knelt down on the mat, held my arms out, and caught him as he collapsed forward with a massive, brilliant laugh. That laugh echoed through the bright, peaceful room. My soul felt completely clean. I sat in my private office later that evening, long after the clinic had closed. The building was quiet. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the original parchment document outlining the irrevocable trust. I ran my fingers over my grandfather's signature at the bottom of the page. When I was younger, I thought my grandfather was just being overly cautious. I thought his obsession with separate accounts and legal fortresses was a symptom of a cynical worldview. Now, sitting in the office of a clinic his foresight had saved. I understood the profound depth of his love. He did not just leave me money. He left me a highly engineered shield. He left me the legal autonomy to walk away from a toxic marriage without losing my entire identity. Legacy is a complicated concept. Eleanor believed her legacy was a massive Victorian house and the illusion of upper-class wealth. She sacrificed her own son's professional future to maintain a hollow facade. Marcus believed his legacy was his corporate title, a title he threw away the moment he could not control his temper. I decided to redefine what family legacy meant to me. I contacted my attorney, Grace, and established a specialised grant programme operating directly out of my clinic. We named it after my grandfather. The grant is designed exclusively to cover the out-of-pocket medical expenses for paediatric patients from low-income households. Every single time a child like Leo receives the specialised therapy they need, my grandfather's actual legacy grows. It is a legacy built on tangible healing, not financial manipulation. I realised that true wealth is not about how much cash you can hoard or how many luxury vacations you can pretend to afford. True wealth is having the absolute freedom to direct your resources toward the things that actually matter. I had successfully defended my borders. The fortress was secure. There is a very faint, silvery scar running along my left collarbone. It is almost completely invisible now, fading into the natural texture of my skin. Most people never notice it. I only see it when I catch my reflection in the bathroom mirror after a hot shower. I do not feel anger when I look at it anymore. I do not feel victimised. I view that small, silent mark as a physical receipt. It is the permanent documentation of the exact moment I stopped compromising my own dignity to keep someone else comfortable. It was the price of my absolute clarity. People often believe that revenge must be loud and destructive. They think it requires screaming matches, vindictive social media posts, or elaborate plots to ruin someone's life. But true retaliation is fundamentally cold. It is structural. I did not have to lift a single finger to destroy Marcus and Eleanor. I simply handed them the legal mirror and let them choke on their own reflection. They wanted me to be their permanent financial anchor. Instead, I became the heavy, undeniable consequence they had spent their entire lives trying to avoid. The ultimate power does not come from screaming at those who hurt you. It does not come from demanding an apology they are incapable of giving. The ultimate power comes from rendering them completely irrelevant to your future. It comes from closing the door, securing your peace, and never looking back. My clinic is thriving. My dog is safe. My future is entirely my own. If this story empowered you to finally draw your own line in the sand, please subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Your peace is worth protecting. I finally have my peace,